Hello, Justin DeHaan here for another segment of Hockey Hardware. Now, I never thought that this channel would make a lot of money, but today we got to talk about the check. Although this check doesn't go to me, this is an old check, and you can take a look at it. It's from 1975, and it's actually a paycheck paid to Toronto Maple Leafs player Eddie Shack on December 31st, 1974. It was cashed as per the stamp January 7th, 1975, and on the back you'll see it is endorsed by the man himself, Mr. Ed Shack. So what did Ed Shack make in 1974-1975 season? Well, he made $2,957.50 a paycheck, a far cry from today's players. Now this check is from Eddie Shack's last season in the NHL when he played with the Toronto Maple Leafs. He had two stints with the Maple Leafs. In his first stint, he won 4 Stanley Cups from 1960 to 1967, and after bouncing around in the NHL a little bit, he ended up being traded from Pittsburgh back to Toronto in exchange for cash, and he played out his final 2 seasons with Toronto, the last being the 1974-75 season. Ed Shack had a couple great nicknames, the Nose and the Entertainer, and when it came to stories of Eddie Shack, I always like to go back to one of my favorite rivalries, the Montreal Canadiens and the Toronto Maple Leafs, and Ed Shack did have some great stories from that rivalry. One time he had his hands tied up and he headbutted Henri Richard, cutting him, and when he went back to Montreal, Maurice Richard said, "Hey, it's a good thing you didn't hit him with your nose, because you would have split my brother in two." Eddie Shack had a rather large nose. That's where the nickname, the Nose, came from. There was also the stories of every time he would deliver a hard check to Canadian superstar Jean Beliveau, he would apologize. Jean Beliveau once asked Ed Shack, "Hey, why do you apologize every time you hit me?" And Ed had the great response, "Jean, sometimes I lie." Now there's another name on this check that also incites some good stories, and we'll get a close-up for you, and that is Harold Ballard, the Maple Leafs owner, president, at one time GM. And Harold Ballard did win Stanley Cups with the Maple Leafs. He's also perhaps one of the most notorious owners in professional sports has ever seen. And there are just a couple of great stories from him that really show why he was such a divisive and hated man. And there was a story about him at the Maple Leaf Gardens on a hot summer's night. A concert was taking place. He shut off the water fountains, he boosted up the heat in the building, and he delayed the concert by an hour, where patrons' only choice for refreshing beverages, that was the concession stand, where he had jacked up the price. Very driven by money. As far as hockey moves, he was known as being a guy who really liked to micromanage the team. He was involved in almost every aspect, and he did fire very popular head coach with the Toronto Maple Leafs, Roger Neilson. He spent a couple days, 2 days, searching for his replacement. He couldn't find one, and so he went back to Roger and said, "Do you want your old job back? I just want you to show up with a paper bag over your head so we could reveal at intermission who the head coach is going to be." Roger did return behind the bench, but the paper bag did not. Ballard did get caught up in some illegal activity, and in 1972 was convicted of 47 charges, including tax evasion. He spent about a year in prison before returning in 1973, where he would once again take over his duties with the Maple Leafs. In his time in prison, his son Bill would take over, and one of the things Bill did was he signed Borje Salming. If Harold Ballard hadn't been in prison at that time, the Maple Leafs would have missed out on one of the best defensemen in their franchise history, because Harold Ballard notoriously did not like European players. Another move that Harold Ballard's son did, much to the chagrin of Harold, is he signed a deal with the Toronto Toros, allowing them to use Maple Leaf Gardens. Harold Ballard was staunchly against the WHA after losing players in contract negotiations, and when he found out that the Toros were playing in his literal backyard, he made it as difficult as possible and ultimately forced them to break the lease. In their first game, when the Toros complained about the lights being dim, Ballard tried to charge them $3,500 a game extra for use of the lights. A very cheap man who owned and operated the Leafs, who really kept them in the dark ages of hockey for a number of years. and his name is on this check, along with the entertainer, Ed Shack. And that is it for today's segment of Hockey Hardware. Thank you for joining me. We have a couple more episodes left in season 1, and then we're going to be taking a quick hiatus, but we will be back on Monday with a new segment. So we'll see you then. Thank you.